Hello, everyone. My name is Mariana Castaño Cano, and it is my pleasure to be talking to you today from Jack Harries' YouTube channel with Jack Harries himself. Hello, Jack. How are you doing?
I'm very good, Mariana. It's a pleasure to be here and speaking with you today.
Well, thank you for being hosting us. Jack has kindly accepted to share this space, his YouTube channel, with UN Climate Change, the United Nations organization in charge of leading the international response to the climate emergency. This live conversation is streamed as well as on YouTube, on Twitter, and on LinkedIn. So hello to everyone tuning in from wherever you are. I invite you to say hello, to let us know from where you are watching. And I also, of course, would like to invite you to drop your questions in the comments, your questions to Jack. Jack, the followers of your channel know you very well. For those friends who are connecting from LinkedIn or Twitter, very briefly, I would like to present you. You are a storyteller, British-born filmmaker. You have founded Earthrise Studio that I strongly recommend everyone go out, check out on Instagram, Earthrise Studio. Jack, you have quite a journey. You are young, you're 28, but you have lived through quite a lot of personal and professional experiences. You started telling your stories here on YouTube very young, and you have ended up interviewing Sir David Attenborough and signing very important and well-followed documentary series. I would like to tell us a little bit about that journey. I am very interested in knowing what brought you here. And what drove you here?
Yeah, of course. It does. It's not been that long a period of time, but it does feel like it's been a long journey in a strange way. And, you know, firstly, just to say thank you for hosting me today, for interviewing me, and for having me in conversation with the UN Climate Change channel. And hello as well to everyone watching. I'm seeing some amazing comments, people from Niger, from the Philippines, from New York, Oman, Peru, Germany, all around the world. So I feel honored to be speaking with you today. My journey, how did I get to this point? It's a good question. I ask myself that regularly. My journey started when I was 18. I created a YouTube channel, this YouTube channel that we're broadcasting through. It was I didn't have a plan. It was I was young and naive and I wanted to make films, and it seemed like an exciting place to do that. This was back in 2011. No one made money making YouTube videos. There was no such thing as a YouTuber. It was just a space for creativity. And that to me seemed really exciting. And so I created a YouTube channel in 2011 and spent a number of years making videos about a range of different topics. I had no specific agenda or plan. You know, I was traveling and fortunate enough to collaborate with different people making films and to meet people all around the world. And for an 18-year-old, it was really exciting at the time. It felt like the doors of the world opened up a little bit. And I learned a lot very quickly. And I think for me, a real turning point was being invited to Greenland with the WWF to go and make a film about climate change. Like most people, I'd heard a bit about climate change growing up. I learned about it at school. I understood it was sort of this problem, but I don't think I understood the ins and outs of it. I wouldn't have considered myself an environmentalist. I never really, I was never that kid. You know, I wasn't really like the outdoor kid who loved nature. Like most people, I liked nature, but not more than most. But this trip changed my entire perspective. It turned my world upside down. We went to camp in the Yakov Southern Glacier, which is one of the most southern glaciers in Greenland. And we joined a glaciologist called Alan Hubbard, who's been studying the ice sheet for 10 years. And he told me about the changes that were happening to the ice sheet, about how rapidly it was melting and what this meant for humanity. And I think for me, that was the first time I linked climate change to affecting people. Because I think for many of us, climate change feels like this very far off thing that's not tangible. It happens to glaciers, to rainforests, and it's hard to understand how it impacts us and our daily lives. And for me, that was a big moment of seeing climate change, of feeling it, of hearing it, and really waking up to the issue. And that led me onto many other journeys to travel to some of the front lines of climate change, to meet people who were being affected, predominantly in the global south. So into Somaliland in 2017 during a severe drought, to the island of Kiribati in 2018 to understand the effects of rising sea levels, and to many different places. And for me, going on those journeys has helped me understand that climate change is not just an environmental issue, but an issue of human rights and social justice. And it's that reframing that has driven me to get involved with activism and to do the work that I'm doing today.
Mm-hmm. You watch it, Jack, with your own eyes, environmental degradation, the climate emergency. We hear scientists telling us that we still have a window of opportunity to act, but that window of opportunity is closing fast. How do you perceive this urgency, this emergency, especially this year that the UK, your country, is hosting the United Nations Climate Change Conference?
Yeah, it's a huge year for climate, particularly in the UK. As you say, we're hosting COP26 in Glasgow. The urgency of this situation, it's hard, I think, for anyone to truly wrap their head around. It's hard to truly grasp because it's so large. You know, scientists, as you say, have been shouting from the rooftops, and they've been doing that since before I was born. And this is something I learned as I started to research into the issue. This isn't a new topic. This is something that scientists have been talking about for many, many years, way back, like from the 80s. And it feels like only the last 2 years to me that people have really woken up to this issue, that we have had a collective awakening to the severity of this issue. And I think there's many reasons for that. I think it's partly due to the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015, which really shook the world. I think it's partly due to the 2018 IPCC report that said we had 12 years left. It was the first time we put a sort of a time limit on how long we had to take action. Then we saw the school strikes, young people rising up around the world. We saw Extinction Rebellion using direct action. And I think all of these things combined seeped into the collective consciousness and woke people up to the reality of the emergency we face. And it feels to me now like the fire alarm has been sounded in a way. That's what the last few years have been about. And what we need now is to take action. And that in a way is a lot more overwhelming because the scale of action that we have to take is huge. But as you say, Mariana, the COP26 is the crucial time and place to do that. It is the time when world leaders gather together. It's 5 years, well, technically 6 years on, but 5 conferences on from the Paris Climate Agreement, which is when world leaders are meant to come back to the table and renegotiate. And it's the time we need to see countries make their plans to halve carbon emissions by 2030. And to put that really clearly, what that means is in the next 9 years, every country has to radically transform almost every aspect of society in order to halve carbon emissions in the next 9 years. It's overwhelming, it's intimidating, it makes you want to bury your head in the sand, but we simply don't have a choice. We know that because the alternative is not thinkable. So that's the significance of this year, and that's what's driving me to make the work that I am this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am very interested in touching upon one topic that you just mentioned. You said the climate crisis can be overwhelming. And we know, because we have talked a lot and we have heard a lot of people from the youth movement or from Extinction Rebellion saying that for them, mobilizing was a way of grieving and healing somehow that eco or climate anxiety. You, Jack, have a personal story with depression. Maybe the reasons that brought you to that point in your life then were a bit different, but you went through that experience. How do you see the situation of people who are dealing with eco-anxiety and eventually depression? And what would you tell them?
Yeah, I think this is a really fascinating topic. Eco-anxiety, climate grief, there's lots of different names for it. Climate anxiety is something that's becoming increasingly common, particularly in young people as they start to understand the scale of the issue we're facing. It's particularly common in the global north. I think many people in the global south are already experiencing the effects of climate change. And I think some of us here in the global north are just waking up to that reality, and that's when the grief and the anxiety sets in. But I think that, you know, you said earlier, Mariana, that taking action is a way to tackle those feelings. And I found personally that the antidote to anxiety is action. For me, the way to deal with those feelings of being overwhelmed, of being anxious, of feeling depressed by the reality of the situation we're in, was to find a collective, a group of people who shared my feelings, because it stops you feeling so alone. I think part of what's so awful about climate grief is you feel as though you're the only one feeling those feelings, and it can be very isolating. So for me, finding other people who shared those feelings was a really important step. And then taking action allowed me to quell that sort of anxiety in a way, and it gave me a renewed sense of purpose, I think. So it's very real, but I think anxiety and depression should be our catalyst into taking action. I think we have to grieve in order to move into that step of taking action.
Mm-hmm. And just before we move on to the storytelling world, eco-anxiety or climate grief comes on top of the situation that many people are going through right now with the health COVID-19 pandemic. And this had other distress into people and personal serious struggle for many people. It has also prevented NGOs and many movements to take the streets and protest. We've seen on the digital sphere a lot of movement nevertheless. How do you see that these last almost 18 months have affected the climate action movement?
That's a really interesting question, and it's fascinating looking back at how this year has transformed the climate movement. I think that staying inside has forced all of us to innovate with the ways that we communicate, with the ways that we organize. Right now, we are live streaming from different parts of the world together to people who are in many other parts of the world. It's forced us to develop technologies faster. I think it's highlighted what happens when we don't listen to the science and we don't act fast enough, but it's also highlighted what happens when we come together and take collective action and how fast we can make drastic changes. So I think it has both positives and negatives. But for me, what I've really seen looking at social media is that, and we'll come on to this more when we talk about storytelling, social media over the last 18 months has really transformed as a space, not just for sharing selfies and, holiday photographs, but as a place for activism, as a place to organize, as a place to educate one another. And that to me is really exciting because I think in a way our generation are waking up to the tools that we have at our fingertips in order to tackle the emerging crises we're facing.
Mm-hmm. Well, you have been telling stories since you were, I don't know how big, but not too big. And I heard you saying that storytelling is the way we are, hardwired somehow as a human species. The fabric of the world is the way we tell stories about the past and the way we tell stories imagining the future. I guess that many people watching us now are young creators. From your own experience, moving from YouTube, making videos with your brother in your room, and then creating your own production company, interviewing Sir David Attenborough, and now with this exciting breakdown project that you are in, what are the advice? What pieces of advice would you give to young creators who may want to put that creativity into service of climate action?
That's a great question. And I really hope there are young creators watching this out there. I mean, I think everyone is a creator. We all have a story to tell. And my single piece of advice would be to tell your story. We need everyone to be a part of this movement. And more than anything else, we need to humanize the climate crisis, which is where we started in this conversation. For too long, it has been about the environment and things that feel separate to us as humans. Climate change is a human rights and social justice issue. It's not an environmental crisis, it's humanity's crisis. And so I think it's so important that everyone steps up to this movement and shares their own story, because that's how we'll humanize it. That's how we'll understand the impacts that climate change is already having on people in the global south and increasingly on the global north as well. So I think that's the most important thing we can do. And I think, as humans, we're very good at telling stories about disaster. If you look at Hollywood, we've seen so many portrayals of the apocalypse and how our world might fall apart. But what we rarely see are stories of hope and positivity. And I think this moment calls on us to have a sort of radical optimism and to start to envision the type of world that we want to see. And so I think that's the storytelling that needs to change. And the fact is, the reality is, there are too many people who look like me telling stories in this space. And we need a much greater diversity of storytellers. And we're starting to see that happen over the last few years. So many amazing creators have stepped up to the mark and started communicating their stories and highlighting the intersecting nature of climate change. And I think that's really important because it helps us understand that it isn't an isolated issue, but it intersects with race, with gender, with religion, with every social issue we could care about, with mental health, as you suggested. So that was quite a long-winded answer, but to condense it down, step up to the mark, tell your story, and lend yourself to the movement would be my advice.
Fantastic. And I would like to ask you, where on how are you putting your energies right now? I just saw that The Guardian featured you, so please tell us a little bit about the project.
Yeah, of course. So for the last 6 months, I've had my head down in an edit room, working on a project which I'm really excited about. It's the biggest project I've ever undertaken, and the concept of the project was simply to try and make a series that told the story of climate change. I felt that there was some storytelling missing that offered the context of climate change. We hear a lot about how bad it is and what we need to do, but not much about how we got into this place. What's the context of this issue? How did it come about? And I feel that when you give someone the context, you give them the power to take action. It's almost like, when you kind of take a wrong path and you have to backtrack your footsteps to get backwards, like leaving a trail of breadcrumbs. It's a bit like that for me. I think that many people don't understand the context of this issue, myself included, for many, many, many years. And when that happens, you just feel completely overwhelmed. You shut down. You don't want to hear it. You don't want to think about it. And so this series is called The Breakdown. It looks at how we got here, where we're headed, and what we can do about it. It's a 5-part show. Hopefully it's engaging and maybe even funny in parts. It's trying to reframe the way we tell stories about climate change. And it will be available on Waterbed Network, which is a new platform dedicated entirely to videos about our planet. And it will also be on my YouTube channel as well. It will be coming out there after. And so my hope is that it helps more people understand this issue, because I really believe that climate change is a storytelling issue. It's the story we've sort of failed to tell in many ways. And so I hope that it goes some way towards helping to communicate the crisis we're facing and empowering people to take action.
Absolutely. Giving the power to people through storytelling, encouraging them to tell their own story, their story of action. And sometimes it's good to hear stories of inaction. What is preventing people from going from belief or attitude into behavioral change?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So, Jack, it has been a great pleasure to be discussing with you about these great topics, to learn a little bit about what you are on right now. I'm looking forward to watch that breakdown series. And I would like to apologize for the quality of the video and to invite people to please join the conversation on social media, to watch this space, Jack Harries' YouTube channel, but also please go and check out on Instagram, Harries Studio. There is great content there, a lot about intersectional approach to climate change and many other issues, climate change, feminism, and so on and so forth. Jack, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Mariana. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I'm sorry if my internet connection hasn't been great, but it's been an honor to speak to you today. And I hope we can do this again in the future.
I hope so. And I'm sure we will have occasions in the run-up to COP26. And don't worry, because your words were transmitted clear. So I'm sure that people got the main of your messages, and I thank you for that. Thank you, Jack.
Great, thank you. Have a lovely day, and thanks to everyone for